The first time the puppy appeared in Lucas Bennett's rearview mirror, he thought his mind was playing tricks on him. Empty highway, no houses for miles, dusk bleeding into night. And yet, there it was again. Tiny, scruffy, brown and white, running straight down the center line, chasing the flashing taillights of a police cruiser like it had nowhere else left to go. He eased off the gas. The patrol car's radio crackled softly, but no calls came in, just static and his own breathing. Lucas checked the mirror once more. The pup slowed, panting hard, then did something that made his stomach tighten. It looked up at him, as if it knew exactly who was behind that wheel. "Where did you come from?" he murmured. Instead of drifting toward the ditch like any frightened animal, the puppy veered in front of the cruiser and stopped, legs shaking, chest heaving. For one suspended second, the world went silent. No crickets, no wind. Just two headlights, one tiny shadow, and an officer who suddenly felt that turning away would be the biggest mistake of his life. Lucas stepped out, boots crunching on gravel. The air smelt of damp earth and pine. Mist crawled low along the road, pooling near the tree line like something alive. The puppy backed up a few steps, gave a sharp, broken bark, then spun toward the woods. It didn't run blindly, it moved with purpose. Forward, pause, look back, forward, pause, look back. Pleading. Every instinct told Lucas this was wrong, too quiet, too remote, too strange. Yet another part of him whispered that if he ignored this desperate little guide, whatever waited out there would never be found. And when he finally discovers why the puppy chose him tonight, it will bring a grown man to tears. Officer Lucas Bennett spotted the puppy before his brain fully registered what he was seeing. 1 second, the quiet country road stretched ahead in a straight, empty ribbon, framed by fields and darkening woods. The next, a tiny brown and white shape wobbled into his headlights, smack in the middle of his lane, as if it had decided this steel giant barreling toward it was exactly what it needed. He eased his foot onto the brake, heart kicking even though he had seen worse things than a lost dog. The cruiser slowed, tires whispering over the worn asphalt, beams cutting through the light mist rolling across the ground. The creature was small, far too small to risk crossing alone at this hour. Scruffy fur clung in uneven tufts to an underfed body, floppy ears dipped to the sides, and its whole frame shook in a way that had nothing to do with the chill. "Easy there, little guy," Lucas muttered, more to himself than to the animal. The radio hummed faintly with distant chatter, but no calls demanded his attention. Just empty airwaves and the soft tick of the engine cooling as he let the vehicle roll to a stop. The puppy did not bolt. It darted forward a few steps, then turned sharply, glancing back at him with dark, gleaming eyes that seemed far too focused, far too aware. It issued a thin, urgent whine, paws sliding slightly on the damp road. Trembling legs, but a stubborn stance. It refused to leave the circle of light around the cruiser, as if abandoning this moment meant giving up on something vital. Lucas frowned. He had seen animals in distress before, wandering, panicked, confused. This was different. This little one was not simply wandering around hoping food might fall from the sky. It was insisting, demanding, leading. He opened his door, the hinges creaking. Evening air rushed in, tinged with wet soil, distant pine, and the fading warmth of a long day. Overhead, the sky was a bruise of violet and deepening blue. The last streaks of sunset stretched thin along the horizon. The mist seemed thicker now, curling around his boots as he stepped down, wrapping his ankles in cool, ghost-like bands. The puppy skittered back, then immediately moved ahead again, as if relieved he had finally come out. It trotted a few yards down the road, tiny paws pattering, then stopped dead near the gravel shoulder. It looked back, floppy ears drooping, whole body vibrating with tension. Another soft whimper, higher now, sharper, like it was running out of time. "What are you doing out here?" Lucas asked quietly. He glanced left and right. No porch lights, no driveways, no farmhouses. Just the suggestion of fences lost in the tall grass, and beyond that, the heavy dark of the forest pressing close. Something's wrong. The thought came not as an idea, but as a cold certainty settling under his ribs. He could feel his training kicking in, cataloging every detail, the direction the pup kept facing, the way it stayed just ahead of him, the repeated glances over its shoulder, and the obvious desperation in its trembling frame. It was not trying to escape him. It was trying to pull him somewhere. The woods. The tree line loomed near the edge of the road, trunks bunched together like a wall. Beyond them, shadows swallowed everything. The fading light barely reached past the first row of branches. Lucas could hear the faint rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, and the hum of a world settling into night. A thin dirt path cut through the grass and disappeared between the trees, almost invisible unless you already knew it was there. The pup darted toward that path. "Hey!" Lucas called, instincts snapping tight. He took a step forward, hand brushing the radio on his shoulder, thumb hovering over the button. He could call this in, report an animal, or log it as nothing. But the image of those pleading eyes refused to leave his mind. Again, the pup paused at the edge of the brush. It turned, staring straight at him. Floppy ears, shaking legs, scruffy fur soaked slightly by the mist, eyes glistening as if reflecting not just light but real terror. "You're not lost," he murmured, more certain with each passing second. "You're guiding me." The realization slid into place with a clarity that made his pulse pick up. He had followed hunches before. An open gate, a light left on, a car parked where it shouldn't be, and more often than not, those instincts led him straight into something he needed to see. Tonight, his gut screamed that walking away would mean leaving something, or someone, in serious trouble. He took a breath, scanning the dark fringe of forest. Every shadow looked like a doorway to something unknown. The mist pooled thicker near the ground, drifting across the path like a thin veil. Somewhere in the distance, deeper than the usual forest sounds, there was a faint, almost imperceptible noise. A muffled cry? A low whimper? He could not be sure, but it tugged at him, the way a nearly forgotten memory sometimes does. The pup gave another sharp bark, jolting him. "All right," Lucas said softly, decision locking in. "I'm coming." He stepped off the asphalt, boots crunching through gravel and into damp grass. The temperature dipped a few degrees as he crossed that invisible boundary between road and wilderness. Overhead, branches knitted together, turning the sky into ragged strips. The world shrank to the narrow beam of his flashlight and the small, urgent figure trotting ahead. With each step, the sounds of the open road faded behind him. The soft hum of the idling cruiser, the faint hiss of tires cooling, and the steady drone of insects near the fields. In their place rose the close, intimate noises of the forest at dusk, twigs snapping underfoot, leaves brushing together, the distant flap of wings, and somewhere up ahead that almost inaudible sound that did not belong. He could feel his heartbeat in his throat now. Not from fear exactly, but from the sense that he was being pulled into the first page of a story that would not let him go once it truly began. The puppy never strayed far. It would rush a few feet forward, then halt, spinning to check that he was still coming, tail low but moving, as if encouraging him to keep up. Every time he hesitated, it answered with another whine, another insistent look, as if speaking a language his training had not covered, but his heart understood anyway. Stay with us. What this tiny pup reveals will shock you. That thought, unbidden, floated through his mind like a whisper from the future. Whatever waited in the dark ahead was the reason this fragile creature had stepped into the path of a moving car and refused to back down. And as Lucas followed it deeper between the trees, one thing became impossible to ignore. He was no longer on a simple evening patrol. He was being led toward a truth the road would never have shown him. Lucas followed the puppy off the shoulder of the road and onto the narrow path that slipped between the trees like a hidden crack in the earth. The last light of evening clung weakly to the sky behind him, but under the branches it might as well have been an hour later. Shadows stacked on shadows, turning trunks into dark pillars and the undergrowth into vague, shifting shapes. Each step pressed dry leaves and twigs under his boots, every crunch sounding too sharp in the eerie quiet. The puppy trotted ahead with surprising determination for something so small. Scruffy brown and white fur bobbed with every step, floppy ears bouncing, tiny body trembling yet never stopping. It would move several yards forward, then halt and twist around, eyes catching the weak beam of his flashlight. A thin, insistent bark would break from its throat, followed by a restless shuffle of paws, as if urging him not to even think about turning back. Lucas swept the light in a slow arc, taking in the tight press of trees and the thin mist curling along the forest floor. The usual chorus of crickets and distant farm sounds seemed muffled, as though the entire landscape was holding its breath. The road already felt far away, like something remembered rather than something he had left only minutes before. You should call this in, he told himself. Procedure existed for a reason. Unknown area, low visibility, strange circumstances. A cautious officer would tap his shoulder mic, give his location and ask for another unit to swing by. At the very least, he could log that he was checking out suspicious movement in the woods. His fingers brushed the radio, then stilled. What exactly was he going to say? Dispatch. I'm following a trembling puppy because my gut says there's more to this. The thought sounded ridiculous even inside his own head, yet the feeling would not go away. The little creature had stepped into a live lane and refused to flee. Now it led him with a stubborn urgency that no simple wanderer would show. The pup paused again, letting out a sharper bark that echoed faintly between the trunks. Lucas stopped beside a moss-covered log and listened. For a moment, there was only the faint rustle of leaves and the quiet tick of his own breathing. Then, barely audible beneath the forest murmur, he caught it. A thin, broken whimper drifting from deeper ahead. It was so soft he almost doubted it, but the puppy reacted instantly, tail lowering, posture tightening, and a low whine stretching from its chest. There it is, he thought. Not just instinct, not just nerves. Something's hurting out here. He shifted his weight, feeling the damp soil give slightly under his heel. Calling for backup would mean stopping, giving coordinates and maybe walking back a bit to get a clearer signal. In that time, whatever was making that weak sound could grow quieter, could fade altogether. He imagined standing by the car later, wondering if his delay had cost a life he never even saw. Still, he knew stories that started with, "I went in alone," often ended with regret. Training had drilled that into him over and over. Every briefing, every cautionary tale carried the same warning. Yet every meaningful save he had made had begun with an uncomfortable choice as well. The decision to step into something uncertain because doing nothing felt worse. The puppy let out another yip, impatient now, pulling him from his thoughts. It padded forward, paws barely whispering over the mulch, then looked back again with those wide, desperate eyes. Lucas took a breath, feeling the chill air burn in his lungs. "All right," he muttered, making his decision. "We keep going. But you stay where I can see you." He moved deeper along the path, keeping his flashlight trained ahead. The beam revealed tangled roots, slick rocks, and low branches that forced him to duck now and then. Mist clung to his pant legs, leaving dark streaks of moisture. The forest smell grew stronger. Wet earth, old bark, the faint hint of something metallic he could not quite place. The twilight above bled into full darkness, leaving only the artificial white tunnel of light cutting through the gloom. Every few steps, that fragile whimper reached his ears again, just enough to guide him, but never loud enough to locate with certainty. It sounded tired and strained, as though whoever made it had been trying for a long time and was running out of strength. The tiny dog reacted each time, ears twitching, body tensing, then pushing forward with renewed urgency. Lucas's thoughts bounced between possibilities. An injured deer tangled in fencing, a stray caught in a trap. Someone's dog was hit by a falling branch during a storm. He tried to imagine the call he would make if he found nothing at all, just an anxious puppy and the echo of his own imagination. But his chest tightened every time the whimper came, and doubt shrank a little more. The canopy thickened overhead, swallowing what little sky remained. The road had completely vanished behind a screen of trunks and brush. If not for the faint impression of the path underfoot, he might have believed they were pushing into untouched ground. It felt like walking into a story that had been waiting for him specifically, the kind people might later hear and shake their heads over. His free hand hovered near his radio once more, thumb brushing the button without pressing it. He promised himself that if anything felt even slightly wrong, if he caught a human voice, a flash of movement, or the glint of metal, he would call it in immediately. No hesitation, no pride. For now, though, the forest gave him only silence, the puppy, and that distant aching sound. A part of him could practically hear the narrator's voice that would tell it. He imagined an audience leaning forward, eyes fixed on a screen, as he followed a shaking ball of fur through the dark. Before we continue, hit like and subscribe to follow this unbelievable rescue story, that invisible voice might say, because whatever waited ahead was not just noise. It was the reason this tiny guide refused to give up. Another crunch of leaves, another snap of a distant twig. His pulse thudded more loudly, though his pace remained steady. He had walked darker alleys and responded to worse calls, yet this isolated hush, this combination of mist, fading light, and that stubborn, pleading puppy unsettled him in a different way. There were no sirens here, no streetlights, and no backup a few blocks away. Only his judgment, his training, and the fragile thread of sound leading him deeper in. The whimper floated through the trees once more. Closer now, edged with exhaustion. Lucas tightened his grip on the flashlight, feeling the knurled metal press into his palm. Whatever waited at the end of this path, he knew he was past the point of turning around. Someone, or something, out here had reached out in the only way it could, by sending a trembling, scruffy messenger to flag down the one person who would listen. And tonight, that person was him. Lucas almost walked past the clearing before he saw her. The path curved around a thick cluster of bushes, and for a moment the flashlight beam slid over nothing but bark, roots, and damp leaves. Then the faint whimper came again, closer and more broken, pulling his attention to a low tangle of branches near a fallen tree. Something under that heap shifted, making the pile of brush look like it had taken a slow, painful breath. The puppy bolted ahead, as if that sound had flipped a switch inside its tiny body. Claws scraped on slick roots as it scrambled through the undergrowth. Tail low, head stretched forward. Lucas followed, stepping over a mossy log, his boot sinking slightly into the soft earth. The smell of wet soil and decaying wood wrapped around him, cooler and heavier than the air by the road. "Hold on," he said quietly, more to himself than to the little guide. The pup reached the brush pile and immediately began to circle it, whining in frantic, high-pitched bursts. It shoved its nose between twigs, backed up, then darted to another angle, searching for a gap. Lucas lowered the flashlight. Beneath the broken limbs and dead leaves, he saw fur. Not the small, scruffy patches he had gotten used to following, but a broad, thick coat, streaked with mud and tangled with debris. As he shifted the beam, the outline of a large dog came into focus. A German shepherd mix, or close to it, lay half buried under the fallen branches. One powerful shoulder was exposed, ribs visible beneath the matted hair. A hind leg jutted out at an unnatural angle, pinned by the weight of the wood. He dropped to one knee, the damp ground soaking through his pants. "Hey," he murmured, voice soft. "Hey there, girl." For a heartbeat, she didn't move. Then a tremor ran along her flank. Her chest lifted in a shallow breath, and a low, raw sound slipped from her throat. Her eyes opened by degrees, dull at first, then slowly clearing enough to focus. They flicked from the flashlight to his face, then to the puppy bouncing at her side. The pup pressed itself against her muzzle, licking frantically, whimpering so hard its whole body shook. It paced in a tight circle, stepping over her paws, nudging her ear, then bumping into Lucas's hand before racing back to her side. Every movement screamed urgency and fear. Yet it refused to step away from her for more than a second. "You brought me here for her," Lucas said, feeling the words settle in his chest. "You didn't give up." The thought hit him with more force than he expected. This little creature had run the length of a dark country road, chased down a moving cruiser, and then led a stranger into the trees, all for this moment. The mother dog had not crawled out of this alone. The puppy had refused to abandon her, and now the responsibility had landed squarely on his shoulders. He studied the branches. The largest one pinned her across the hips and lower back, its broken end wedged into the soil. Smaller limbs lay crisscrossed over her sides, holding her in place like a crude cage. Every shallow breath made the debris shift slightly, tugging at the matted fur. Her paws twitched now and then, claws scraping weakly at the dirt, but there was no strength behind the motion. The forest around them seemed suddenly smaller. Leaves rustled high overhead, a constant soft hiss. The air was thick with the scent of damp bark and the faint metallic hint of blood. The only clear, sharp sounds were the pup's insistent barks and the strained, uneven breathing of the trapped dog. Lucas felt his heart climbing into his throat. Training told him to assess, plan, and wait if necessary. Instinct told him that waiting might mean watching those eyes go dull. He could call for backup and hope another unit got here in time. He could step back, mark the location, and tell himself he had done the sensible thing. But the picture of the pup chasing his patrol car rose in his mind. That tiny body risking the highway because it believed someone had to care. He placed a hand on the mother's shoulder, fingers sinking into the thick, dirty fur. "Easy," he whispered. "I'm here now." She shivered under his touch, not in fear, but in pain and exhaustion. Her gaze locked on his face for a long second, searching, measuring. He saw fear there, but also something quieter, something like a question. Would he help? Would he leave? Her life, and the small life pressed against her, balanced on what he chose to do next. The puppy hopped onto his boot, front paws slipping on the damp leather. It stared up at him with wide, desperate eyes, then spun and pressed itself back against the shepherd's chest, as if physically tying the three of them together. Its tiny chest heaved, breath coming in fast bursts, each high whine cutting through the muted forest sounds. Lucas's jaw tightened. He traced the line of the main branch with his eyes, noting where it rested on the fallen trunk behind them, and how its weight was distributed. If he lifted the wrong part first, the whole thing might shift and crush her further. If he hesitated too long, she might stop breathing before he even tried. The woods offered no advice. Leaves brushed together overhead with a faint, ceaseless whisper. His flashlight threw hard shadows across the scene, turning branches into jagged black shapes and the mist into thin, shifting veils. He thought of other nights, other decisions. Doors he had chosen to open, alleys he had gone down alone because someone might be suffering just out of sight. No one would have blamed him if he had kept driving tonight. Writing the puppy off as a stray. No one but this small, trembling family at his feet. "I can't walk away from you," he said quietly, almost to himself. The weight of responsibility settled fully on him, heavy yet strangely clear. There was no partner here, no waiting ambulance, no quick handoff. Just a man, a helpless dog, and a puppy that refused to accept defeat. His choices in the next few minutes would decide whether this story ended in silence or in something better. The mother drew in another breath, rough and shallow. The pup pressed its head under her chin, as if trying to hold her to the earth. Lucas could feel time stretching thin, each second loud and sharp inside his chest. He flexed his hands, grounding himself in the solid feel of bark and soil. The tension in the air seemed to rise, humming just beneath the surface of sound. The rustle of leaves, the creak of branches, and the small, desperate noises from the dogs all blurred into a single, fragile moment. He knew one thing with absolute certainty now. Whatever else happened tonight, he had been led here for a reason, and he would not leave this clearing without trying everything he could to free her that night. Lucas shifted his knees in the damp soil and forced himself not to rush, even though every muscle in his body begged him to start tearing branches away. If he panicked, he could crush her. If he hesitated too long, she might slip away right in front of him. He drew a deep breath, cold air burning his lungs, and angled the flashlight carefully over the tangle of wood that pinned the German Shepherd mix to the ground. The light slid across her body, revealing details that made his stomach knot tighter. Her chest rose in short, ragged breaths, each inhale followed by a worrying pause, as if she had to fight for every fragment of air. A smear of dried blood marked the fur along her ribs. Dirt clung in thick patches to her coat, and beneath the grime he could see the outline of ribs that had no business showing that clearly. Her hind quarters were twisted, her lower back forced at an unnatural angle under a thick branch that had crashed down and driven its broken end deep into the earth. Around them, the forest closed in like a circle of silent witnesses. Tall trunks blotted out nearly all remaining light. What little still filtered through arrived in thin, sickly strips. Low fog lingered near the ground, drifting in pale sheets that coiled around his boots and the fallen limbs. Shadows stretched between roots and underbrush, swallowing the edges of the clearing until it felt like they were standing in a small, isolated pocket separate from the rest of the world. The puppy stayed glued to her side, as if the earth itself would throw them apart if it gave the clearing even an inch. Its scruffy body pressed against her neck, tiny chest pumping, breathing faster than any heart should have to. Every time she managed a thin exhale, the pup nudged her muzzle, whining with a raw desperation that sounded too big for such a small throat. It shifted, tucked itself along her jaw, then crept closer still, like it believed that if it could just cover enough of her with its trembling warmth, she would be safe. Lucas swallowed, throat dry. "You held on for her," he whispered under his breath, hardly aware he had spoken. "And she brought me." He reached out and laid his fingers very gently against the fur near the mother's shoulder, choosing a spot far from the twisted hindquarters and the worst of the debris. Heat met his palm, but beneath that warmth was a deep, unsettling tremor that had nothing to do with the chill in the air. Her skin quivered under his touch, muscles shuddering from shock and pain. Warm, but not burning. No fever to explain it away. Just a body pushed far past its limits. His training ticked through possibilities in the back of his mind: broken bones, internal bleeding, bruised organs, maybe more damage hidden beneath the matted coat. Out here, alone, with only a small first aid kit in his cruiser and no stretcher, there was no margin for error. This was not a case where he could simply wait and let other hands take over. If he waited too long, there might be nothing left to save. He moved the flashlight beam toward the main branch, pinning her. It lay like a crude beam of a collapsed roof, weight centered across her hips. Smaller limbs spidered out from it, trapping her in a cage of splintered wood. The line of the branch told a brutal story. A tree weakened over time. A storm or wind finishing the job, and the heavy limb crashing down just as this dog had been in the wrong place. He could see fur rubbed away where she had tried to drag herself out, claw marks gouged into the soil as she had scratched and kicked for any scrap of freedom. "How long were you lying here?" he murmured, staring at those lines in the dirt. "Hours? Longer?" Long enough for her pup to understand that staying beside her wouldn't be enough, that help had to come from somewhere else. Long enough for that little creature to make an impossible choice and dash toward a road where headlights meant danger, but also hope. The German shepherd's eyelids fluttered. Slowly, with obvious effort, she opened them enough to look at him. Pain sat there, old and heavy, but so did a tired kind of awareness. Her gaze drifted from his face to the uniform, then down to the puppy glued against her jaw, and back again. There was a question in that look. Maybe not words, but a plea all the same. "Are you going to help us or walk away?" Lucas felt something twist in his chest. The puppy let out a sharp, broken whine and climbed half onto her shoulder, pressing its full weight, scrawny as it was, along her. Tiny paws dug into the earth, nails scraping as it tried to wedge itself even closer, like it could force her to stay conscious through sheer will. Loyalty radiated from that small, shaking body. It hadn't left her when the tree fell. It hadn't left when night came. It hadn't left when its own legs had to hurt from all the running. That unshakable devotion had dragged him into these woods. He slid his hand under the heavy branch, fingers exploring the rough surface, wrist brushing damp moss. The wood felt solid, dense with absorbed moisture and heavier than it looked. He traced its length, followed where it rested against the shattered trunk, and noted the angle at which it plunged into the ground. If he lifted too quickly on the wrong side, it could roll, shift, or slam down harder in another spot. If he hesitated and did nothing, those shallow breaths might stop entirely. And the clearing would be quiet for all the wrong reasons. He shifted his weight, boots sinking deeper into the soft soil. The faint sound of leaves rubbing against one another drifted overhead, a steady whisper underlined by occasional creaks from unseen branches high above. Somewhere farther off, something small rustled through the undergrowth, then went still. No cars, no human voices, no help. A faint, strained noise broke the hush. The mother dog drew in another breath. and this time the sound that followed bordered on a whimper. Her hind leg twitched involuntarily, sending a shudder through the rest of her. Her jaw clenched, then relaxed, and a tiny, defeated sound escaped between her teeth. She was trying not to cry out, even now, as if she did not want to frighten her pup. Lucas felt a cold weight settle in his gut. She was closer to the edge than he had let himself admit. His mind gave him the summary in clinical terms: condition critical, multiple trauma sites, slipping strength. His heart translated it a different way. If you fail here, she dies, and that little one watches it happen. The puppy reacted instantly to her small cry. It yelped back, a frantic answer, and burrowed its head under her chin as far as it could. Its body shook so hard he could see the tremors through the scruffy fur. For a moment, it lifted its gaze to him again. Wide eyes shone in the narrow beam of light, pleading without language, begging him to understand what it already knew. This was the last chance. A thought flickered through his mind, quiet yet powerful. Comment below if you believe even the smallest creature can guide a hero. He almost snorted at himself. This wasn't a story someone was telling in a warm room. This was cold mud, wet leaves, and a dog whose life hung on whether he could move a tree. Yet the truth of that thought stayed. He wouldn't be here without the little one. He wouldn't have slowed his cruiser, stepped off the road, or pushed into this fog-choked pocket of woods. Instinct and training had brought him part of the way. A trembling puppy had carried him the rest. He braced one hand under the thickest part of the branch and spread his fingers wide for better grip. The other hand slipped nearer to the buried end, careful not to crowd her body. He tested the weight, pushing just enough to feel how stubbornly the wood resisted. Muscles bunched in his forearms, shoulders tightening as he leaned his weight into it. The limb grudgingly shifted a fraction, bark creaking, soil crumbling. The shepherd let out a strangled sound, a mix of pain and hope, and he immediately eased back, teeth clenched. "Easy," he breathed. "I've got you. Just hold on a little longer." His pulse hammered in his ears. The fog around them thickened again, spilling over the low brush and swirling like breath from some huge, unseen creature. The flashlight beam carved a bright tunnel through the dense air, leaving everything outside its narrow cone buried in black. Time felt strange, stretching and compressing at once, every second loaded with more pressure than some entire shifts had carried. He understood now, fully, how close she was to not making it. Every shallow rise of her chest could be the last. Every shiver might be the one where her strength finally folded. If he walked away, he would carry that knowledge forever. If he stayed and failed, these woods would remember him as the man who tried too late. The puppy nudged her once more, then looked back at him with eyes that refused to accept defeat. Lucas met that gaze, heart clenched, and knew there was no version of this night where he simply turned around and left. He was in it now, completely bound to them by duty, by instinct, and by the kind of connection that forms when one living being decides to trust another with everything. He dug his boots into the soil, reset his grip on the branch, and gathered his strength for another attempt, fully aware that whatever he did next might decide whether the clearing echoed with relief or went silent forever. Lucas stared at the fallen tangle and knew thinking time was over. The shepherd's breaths were turning thin and fragile, her sides barely lifting before sagging back into the dirt. The puppy's cries tore through the cramped clearing, high and raw, echoing off the trunks like an alarm only he could hear. Fog slid through the trees, clinging to roots and low branches, and the darkness felt heavier with every passing second. If he hesitated now, the little guide's desperate mission would end in silence. He grabbed his flashlight, set it on a flattish stone, and twisted it until the beam cut across the crushed wood and the dog's trapped body. Pale light washed over matted fur, shaking muscles, and the twisted line of her hindquarters pinned to the ground. He shrugged out of his duty jacket and snapped it open with one quick motion, the cold night air biting at his sweat-damp arms. He spread the heavy fabric beside her, smoothing it over the uneven earth, building a small patch of softness between her and the rocks and splinters. "Stay with me, girl," he said quietly. "I'm going to get you out of this. You've already fought too hard to stop here." The puppy seemed to cling to that promise. It backed up just far enough to give him room, then darted forward again, hovering near her muzzle, paws churning restlessly through wet leaves. It barked in short, sharp bursts, each sound like a demand that she keep breathing. Her chest rose again in a shallow drag of air, and he felt urgency coiled tight under his ribs. Lucas slid both hands beneath the largest length of wood, fingers digging into wet ridges of bark. The surface was slick with mist and crumbling moss, and the weight pressed down with stubborn, unyielding strength. He braced his boots in the soft ground, felt them sink, and pulled in a slow breath. On the exhale, he drove his legs and back upward, lifting, dragging, forcing that buried mass to move. For a long heartbeat it refused, then the deep end tore free of the soil with a grinding sound that shook through his arms. His right foot shot sideways on a layer of soaked leaves. The shift nearly dumped him backward, and the heavy length lurched toward the shepherd's spine. For one cold instant, he saw it crashing down again and crushing what little life she had left. He snarled under his breath, locked his leg, and forced his shoulders to keep rising. Bark scraped his sleeves, ripped threads from his shirt, and carved hot scratches across his forearms, but he heaved the weight away until it crashed clear of her with a dull, shaking thud. The impact jolted the ground. The shepherd jerked, a hoarse sound tearing loose from her throat. The puppy yelped and threw itself against her neck, its small body shivering so hard its paws slipped on the mud. Tail clamped tight, ears flattened, eyes wide and shining, it shoved its side along her jaw as if trying to hold her together. Lucas dropped to his knees again, the pounding of his own pulse roaring in his ears as he listened for the next breath. He ran his hands lightly along her hips and hind legs, feeling through the tangled fur for jagged breaks. Her muscles trembled under his fingers, and here and there he felt swelling and wrong angles that made his stomach clench. Still, the way her chest moved now told him something had changed. Without the crushing weight across her back, air slid in just a little easier. The ground under his knees was slick and cold, mud sliding under him whenever he shifted. Water seeped through his trousers, leaves sticking to the fabric. When he reached for another length wedged near her belly, a sharp splinter caught his shirt and bit into the skin beneath. He grunted at the sting but yanked the piece free, flinging it aside where it snapped against a root. Smaller fragments followed, scraped away with fast sweeps of his arm. Bark, twigs, and clumps of dirt scattered across the clearing while he carved a narrow space around her body. "Almost there," he whispered. "Just a little more. Don't quit on me now." He eased the jacket under her in stages, lifting with one hand and tugging the fabric through with the other. Each small rise drew a low groan from her chest, and her paws twitched weakly in the soil. The puppy moved with them, refusing to let its own body lose contact with hers. It crept along her side, whining in a steady stream, licking at her nose whenever her eyes drooped, pressing its scruffy flank to her cheek as though its warmth alone could keep her anchored. The forest felt close and intent. Leaves brushed against one another high above, each soft rasp sounding like a whispered warning. Discarded debris hit the ground with dull thumps that echoed strangely in the dark. Fog thickened around the small pool of light, breaking the beam into hazy ribbons that turned the clearing into a suspended, unreal stage. Beyond that circle, the woods were a black wall, full of unseen shapes and listening silence. He planted one knee beside her ribs and the other near her shoulders, using his legs to brace his weight. With one arm, he cradled her chest, easing her onto the cushioned fabric, careful not to let her head slam down. With the other, he guided her hindquarters, trying not to jolt the twisted limb more than absolute necessity demanded. Each adjustment drew another shallow gasp and a tremor that shook through her frame, straight into his hands. The puppy scrambled partly onto the jacket with her, pressing its side against the place just above her collarbone. Tiny claws scratched the cloth, but it stayed put, gaze locked on her face. When her eyelids began to fall, it barked once, a sharp, pleading note that snapped them up again. In that scrap of fur he saw a loyalty so fierce it almost hurt to look at it, a stubborn refusal to accept any ending that did not include her getting up. "You're not alone," Lucas said, voice rough but steady. "She stood by you, and I'm standing by both of you. We're not done." He slid one hand under her neck, lifting just enough to open her airway while she lay on the makeshift cradle. Warm, damp breath brushed against his wrist, still uneven but steady enough to count. He watched the rise and fall of her flank, silently marking each cycle, willing the next one to come. Every pause stretched a little too long. Every weak exhale landed in his chest like a warning he refused to accept. His arms shook from effort, shoulders burning, fingers numb where bark had scraped them raw. Sweat cooled on his skin until the night air cut through like ice, but he pushed the sensations aside. Pain and fatigue could wait. Right now, the only thing that mattered was keeping her breathing long enough to carry her out of this hollow. Then he shifted, ready to carry them out. Lucas knew leaving the clearing would be the hardest part. Moving the branch had been brutal, but now distance stood between the shepherd and any real help. The patrol car felt impossibly far away, separated from him by a twisting path of mud, roots, and shadows. He slid his arms under her body, feeling the weight settle across his forearms and chest. Her head lolled until he guided it gently against his shoulder, cheek brushing his collar, breath warm and ragged against his neck. The jacket cradled her beneath like a makeshift sling. He tightened his grip, braced his feet, and pushed himself upright. Muscles protested at once. His back flared with strain, thighs burning as he fought for balance on the slick ground. The injured leg hung at an awkward angle, so he shifted to keep it from swinging. Every adjustment pulled a faint sound from her throat, a rough whisper of pain that cut deep. The puppy rushed in as soon as he stood. It circled his boots, then bolted a few steps toward the path, barking with nervous urgency. When he did not move fast enough for its liking, it ran back, jumped at his shin, and spun again, tail low but insistent. The message was clear. Now. No hesitation, no retreat. He drew a breath and took the first careful step. Mud sucked at his boots, slick over hidden roots. His pulse hammered, a steady drumbeat in his ears that seemed to echo the uneven rhythm of the mother dog's heart against his chest. Each breath she drew pressed weakly into his shirt, a fragile thud of life that felt like it could falter if he stumbled. He leaned slightly forward, letting his legs carry most of the load while his arms locked to keep her close. Night had settled among the trees. The world beyond his flashlight had become a wall of black. Fog hugged the path, swirling around his knees. Branches arched overhead, clawing at the sky. Somewhere a night bird cried once, then went silent again, as if even it sensed the urgency below. Every sound felt amplified, the squelch of mud, the rasp of his breathing, and the soft wheeze near his collarbone. The puppy trotted ahead, staying just within the edge of the beam. Its small paws splashed through shallow puddles, scattering damp leaves. Every few yards it paused, glancing back at him. Ears pricked despite the tremor in its stance. If he slowed, it let out a sharp bark, as if scolding him for daring to feel tired. Then it pivoted forward again, the tiny guide carving a line through darkness. Lucas could feel his heartbeat pounding in time with his steps. Lift, plant, shift, repeat. Each movement strained his shoulders, jarred his spine, and burnt his arms. The shepherd's weight never eased. If anything, she seemed to grow heavier as fear piled on top of muscle and bone. Every time he considered pausing, her chest rose with another shaky breath, and he pushed on. Rest could wait. She could not. A low branch scraped his upper arm, snatching at his shirt and nearly spinning him off balance. He twisted sideways at the last second, absorbing the blow with his shoulder rather than letting it jolt her. Bark scratched along his sleeve, claws dragging across cloth, but he shielded her with his body. Loose twigs rained down, tapping the jacket, brushing her fur. The puppy snapped at the falling bits as if they were threats, then hurried ahead once more. The path dipped without warning. His front foot slid into a patch of soft earth hidden under leaves. Weight lurched forward, dog and all, and his heart slammed hard enough to blur his vision. For an instant, he felt gravity trying to drag them down. He threw his back leg out, boot scraping rock, and locked his knees, turning the fall into an ugly, jarring step instead of a collapse. The movement drew a ragged grunt from the shepherd and a strangled sound from his own throat. "Sorry, girl," he panted. "Almost there, just hold on." He had no idea how far almost really was, but he repeated it anyway, using the promise like a rope to pull himself along. One step, another, each one a small victory, bought with burning muscles and slippery footing. His lungs worked harder now, dragging in cold air that cut the back of his throat. Sweat cooled quickly on his skin, leaving him chilled beneath the effort. The mother dog's heartbeat pressed faintly against his ribs, a slow, uneven thump that worried him more with every cycle. Sometimes he lost it for a heartbeat and held his breath, desperate to feel it again. When a new pulse finally nudged his chest, relief washed over him so intensely his knees nearly buckled. The puppy's panting matched the urgency, harsh little breaths puffing steam into the mist as it ran, circled, and darted back to check on them. Its quick gasps wove with his deeper ones, 3 pulsing rhythms moving through the dark together. The forest path became a tunnel of breath and heartbeats driving them toward the light. Rocks hid beneath slick leaves. Once, a tangle of vines snagged his boot, halting his stride mid-step. The sudden stop jolted his entire frame, and he had to wrench his leg free without jerking her. His calf burnt, but he gritted his teeth and pushed on, focusing on the faint sense that open space lay ahead. Somewhere in front of them the trees began to thin. He could feel it before he saw it, in the way the air shifted and distant sounds changed. The oppressive hush of the woods loosened. Fog spread out, no longer trapped between dense trunks. His flashlight found more gaps between shadows, hinting that the tree line waited close. His heart banged against his ribs now, a relentless rhythm that matched the throbbing in his arms. Yet against his chest, the shepherd's flank still moved. Each breath remained labored, but they came, one after another, stubborn and fragile. The puppy barked again, voice hoarse, and spun in a quick, hopeful circle that told him it recognized the nearness of escape. "Keep going," Lucas whispered. "For her. For both of them." The path rose slightly before dipping toward the ditch. That final incline felt steeper than any hill he had ever climbed, Every inch demanded more from his legs, threatening to turn them to rubber. He leaned forward, cradling her closer, drawing strength from the faint heartbeat against his chest and the frantic encouragement racing at his feet. For a moment he imagined what it would mean to arrive too late, and the picture alone gave him enough fire for 10 more steps. When he finally saw the pale gleam of the road through the thinning trunks, relief hit so hard it almost stole his breath. The patrol car's headlights glowed where he had left them, twin beacons cutting through mist near the lane. The sight renewed him. He tightened his grip around the shepherd, squared his shoulders, and took the last few steps out of the forest, carrying her toward the only chance she had left. By the time Lucas turned into town, the tight knot in his chest had shifted from raw panic to a focused, brittle hope. The shepherd lay across the back seat, where he had settled her on his jacket, ribs rising in shallow, uneven movements. Each breath sounded rough yet more consistent than in the forest, a fragile rhythm he checked in the rearview mirror again and again. The puppy stayed pressed against her side, tiny body wedged as close as it could possibly fit, eyes never leaving her face even when the cruiser bounced over a pothole. He flicked a glance at the dashboard clock, then back to the empty road ahead. Streetlights appeared more often now, breaking the darkness into short pools of yellow, then giving way to shadow, then returning. The animal hospital sign finally came into view near the corner, a small building with soft white light spilling from its windows and a simple blue paw print on the front. Tonight, that modest symbol looked like a beacon. Lucas pulled into the lot and stopped so fast the car rocked. He killed the engine, jumped out, and yanked open the rear door. Cool night air washed over the dogs. The shepherd's gaze fluttered, unfocused but faintly responsive. The puppy gave a sharp bark, as if announcing their arrival, then licked her muzzle in frantic little strokes. A receptionist in pale green scrubs stepped outside, phone still in her hand. She froze at the sight of the officer leaning into the cruiser. "We've got an emergency," Lucas called, voice firm despite the pounding in his chest. "Adult dog crushed by a fallen branch. She's still breathing, but she won't last long without help." Those words jolted the staff into motion. The receptionist disappeared through the sliding doors, then reappeared with a vet and another technician behind her. One rolled a low-wheeled table, and another carried blankets and a small kit. Their faces shifted from surprise to focus the moment they saw the shepherd's condition. Mud, dried blood, and matted fur told the story before he finished. "Let's get her inside," the vet said calmly. She had silver at her temples and a tired, steady gaze. Lucas slid his arms under the dog again, feeling the familiar weight settle against him. The vet supported her head while the technician guided the distorted hind leg. Together, they eased her onto the waiting table. The puppy leaped after her, scrambling at the frame until Lucas scooped it up and set it gently beside her chest. As the team pushed the table toward the entrance, automatic doors parted with a soft hiss. Bright corridor lights banished the deep shadows that had clung to him since he left the highway. The smell of disinfectant, heating vents, and faint animal fur replaced damp soil and cold fog. Inside the treatment room, stainless steel surfaces gleamed under harsh overhead lamps. Monitors waited, ready to wrap numbers around the fear in his chest. The shepherd was shifted to a higher table and surrounded by quiet, efficient movement. An oxygen mask slipped over her muzzle. A needle found a vein. Someone whispered numbers. Someone else adjusted a drip. Lucas stepped back, suddenly aware of the mud drying on his boots, forest debris stuck to his uniform, and small scratches along his arms. His chest still heaved slightly from the effort, but the heavy, immediate danger felt like it was finally beginning to ease. The puppy refused to be pushed aside. It paced along the base of the table, tail wagging in short, jerky bursts, nails ticking against the floor. Whenever the mother let out a low sound, the pup answered with a soft whine, stretching up to nuzzle the edge of the blanket. A technician tried to herd it back toward the wall, but it wriggled past, stubbornly returning to its post near her shoulder. "Let it stay," the vet said without looking away from the monitors. "Sometimes they'll fight harder when they know their little one is close." Her tone remained clinical, yet the words carried a warmth that settled some of the ice in Lucas's stomach. He watched the green line on one screen rise and fall in tiny peaks, irregular but present, mapping out the dog's heartbeat in bright pulses of light. Minute by minute, that line steadied, the jagged rhythm smoothed just enough to make the breaths look less like desperate gasps and more like a body catching up after a long, brutal struggle. The shepherd's eyelids fluttered open, heavy but not vacant. Her gaze drifted over the faces around her before finding the small shape at the edge of the table. The puppy answered instantly, wagging harder, stretching forward until its paws almost slipped. Lucas felt tension drain from his shoulders in slow, uneven waves. His muscles still ached from the climb out of the woods, yet the sharp fear riding alongside every step began to loosen its grip. He leaned back against the wall, letting the cool surface steady him. For the first time since he had seen that tiny shadow in his headlights, he let himself believe that this might end with both of them alive. The vet finished wrapping the leg and checked the readouts once more before turning toward him. "She's not out of danger," she said, "but she's stable for now. Fluids and oxygen are helping. We'll need imaging to see the full damage. Still, considering what you described, she's very lucky you got her here when you did." She tilted her head toward the puppy, and very lucky that one refused to give up. The pup had finally settled at the corner of the blanket, half on the table, half sliding toward the edge, eyes drooping with exhaustion. Its chest rose and fell in quick, tired motions. Every time the shepherd shifted, it snapped awake, nose nudging her fur, reassurance offered and received in a private language he could only witness from the outside. Relief washed through him so completely it felt almost unreal. His hands still shook faintly from effort, yet a different warmth spread through his chest, pushing out the lingering chill of the forest. He looked at the two dogs, the battered mother, the persistent pup curled close, and felt a quiet, profound gratitude that he had chosen to listen when a tiny creature demanded his attention on a lonely road. They could have vanished out there, hidden beneath branches and fog, their story untold, their loyalty unseen. Instead, they lay under clean lights, with steady hands guarding the thin thread of life that still held. The emergency had not vanished, but its edge had softened. Where there had been only dread, there was now a growing sense of hard-won safety, and the simple, overwhelming relief of knowing that, at least for tonight, they had made it to help in time. Lucas exhaled slowly, a long, shuddering breath that seemed to leave the worst of the night on the tiled floor. He glanced toward the waiting room and knew reports and paperwork would come later. For now, he stayed where he was, simply watching loyalty being rewarded and life refusing, stubbornly, to let go just yet entirely. It smelt like coffee from the front desk, clean blankets from the laundry, and a quiet hope that settled into the halls after visiting hours. He pushed the door open with his shoulder, a small paper bag in one hand, and felt his chest loosen as soon as he saw the glow from the kennel room at the end of the corridor. He did not need anyone to guide him now. He knew exactly where she was. Her coat, once dull and tangled, had been brushed until a soft sheen returned to the tan and black fur. An IV line still taped to her foreleg reminded him how close she had come to not leaving those woods. Her eyes, though, were clear and warm, tracking his every movement. The puppy lay sprawled across her chest, belly exposed, paws limp in sleep, and scruffy ears sticking out at perfect, ridiculous angles. At the sound of his boots, the pup stirred. It blinked, recognized him, and launched itself from the blanket in an awkward leap that nearly knocked its own legs out from under it. Lucas dropped to a crouch just in time to catch the tiny body against his knee. Paws scrabbled for purchase, nails tapping his uniform, tail wagging so hard its whole torso wiggled. Behind it, the shepherd lifted her head and studied him in a long, thoughtful silence before letting out a slow sigh that sounded almost like relief. "Hey, partners," he said quietly. "You two look better every day." The shepherd's tail swept once, then again, small, cautious arcs that spoke more than any bark could. The puppy climbed his boot, trying to scale him like a mountain until he scooped it up with one hand. It wriggled, licking at his chin, then twisted so it could still see its mother. The steady beep of a monitor and the soft rustle of blankets filled the space where Panic had lived just nights before. He sat on the low stool beside the run, forearms resting along the rail. The pup finally collapsed in his lap, head sinking onto his thigh with a dramatic sigh, as if all the courage in the world had suddenly grown heavy. The shepherd's gaze followed his hand each time he reached forward to touch her neck. There was no fear there now, only trust, and something else that tugged at him. A quiet recognition of the man who had appeared in the dark when she had almost run out of strength. The vet stepped in a few minutes later, checked the chart, and smiled. "She's responding well," she said. "Pain is under control. Vitals are steady and appetite is good. We'll still need to be careful with that leg, but she's past the worst of it." Lucas let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. The memory of the forest returned in flashes. The weight of the branch, the slippery path, and the sound of labored breathing against his chest. Each image felt distant now, as if it belonged to another life, yet his muscles still remembered the strain. Looking at them like this, surrounded by light and warmth, felt nothing short of miraculous. "Any idea what happens next?" he asked. The vet glanced at the empty section on the intake form where an owner's information should have been. "No one's called," she said. "No tags, no microchip, no flyers. As far as we can tell, they were on their own for a long time. Once she's cleared, they'll need a home, preferably one that takes them together." The puppy, as if understanding, rolled onto its back and batted at his hand with both paws. The shepherd watched, ears relaxed, eyes half-lidded but alert. Lucas felt the shape of the decision that had been forming since the night he carried them out of the woods slide fully into place. "What if that home was mine?" he said. The room grew very still. The vet studied his face, then the dog's. The shepherd's gaze had drifted back to him, calm and steady, as if waiting to hear the answer she already knew. The puppy had gone still against his leg, staring up as though the entire world hung on the next few words. "You're sure?" the vet asked. He nodded. "I keep thinking about that road. He chased my car instead of giving up." She held on until help came. "I don't like the idea of dropping them at a shelter and walking away like they were just another call I responded to. I have space, I have time, and I already check on them more than I check on myself." The vet's smile widened, softening the tired lines around her eyes. "Then, I'd say you three made your choice the first night. We'll handle the paperwork. You just need to be ready for muddy floors and chewed shoes." He signed every form they handed him, each stroke of the pen settling the decision deeper into his bones. This was more than gratitude for a story with a good ending. It was a promise to turn one night of terror into a lifetime of safety, to answer the trust that had been placed in him by two creatures who had nothing else to lean on. A few days later, he opened his front door with the strange feeling that everything familiar was about to look different. The shepherd stepped over the threshold slowly, testing each move, bandaged leg carefully protected by a sling the vet had shown him how to use. Her nose worked overtime, tasting every scent in the air. Behind her, the puppy barreled inside as if it had lived there forever, nails skittering across the floor, sliding into furniture, bouncing back again with unshaken joy. He spread a thick blanket near the window where the afternoon light pooled in a warm square. The shepherd lay down with a tired huff, breathing deep, eyes drifting half-closed. The puppy spun in circles, grabbed a fallen corner of the fabric, and tugged until it was satisfied with the arrangement. Only then did it flop onto her side, head resting against her shoulder, tail still giving small, contented taps against the floor. Lucas sank onto the couch and watched them for a long time. The house, once filled only with the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling wood, now carried the soft sounds of shared life, nails clicking, collars jingling, and the quiet rumble of a dog's sigh as sleep crept in. He thought about how heroism sometimes meant sprinting into danger, yet sometimes it meant simply not turning away when a tiny voice asked for help. He rubbed his thumb along the shepherd's ear, then reached down to scratch the puppy's chest as it snored. "Share this story if you believe loyalty and love can change lives," he murmured, imagining the people who might need a reminder that even the smallest choices can open a door to something better. Then he leaned back, letting the steady rhythm of their breathing fill the room, grateful that one trembling pup on a quiet road had chosen his car, his night, and ultimately his heart. In the end, if you trace the whole story back to where it truly began, it did not start with sirens, flashing lights, or dramatic orders over the radio. It began with something far smaller and easier to overlook: a trembling puppy standing in the middle of a dark country road, refusing to move out of the way of a passing patrol car. No one sent that little dog. No call log recorded the moment. Yet that tiny, stubborn life chose to run after help instead of curling up in the woods and giving up. Because the truth is simple and powerful at the same time. None of what followed would have happened without that persistence. The mother dog did not shout, could not pick up a phone, and had no way to explain that a fallen branch had turned the forest into a trap. She only had one small witness willing to act. The pup chased headlights, barked at a stranger, and led Lucas off the safe, paved road into the heavy shadows between the trees. Somewhere in that choice, everything changed. Lucas could have shrugged, driven around, and kept going. He could have told himself it was just another stray in the night, not his problem, not his responsibility. But something in the way that puppy kept running, kept looking over its shoulder with raw urgency in its eyes, cut through the routine of a quiet shift. Instead of ignoring the strange sight, he slowed, stepped out, and listened to a voice that never spoke a word but begged him to follow anyway. That is where courage came in. Not the kind people always picture with crowds watching and applause waiting afterward, but the kind that happens in silence when no one is there to see you decide. In a dark forest, under broken branches and cold fog, Lucas used nothing more than his hands, his training, and his will to say, "Not tonight. This is not where your story ends." He lifted, pushed, slipped, caught himself, carried, and refused to let the weight in his arms become a memory of what was lost. The result of that partnership between a desperate pup and a determined officer now lies in simple, beautiful moments. A once-trapped German Shepherd mix rests on a warm blanket instead of cold dirt. Her breaths, once ragged and uncertain, now rise and fall in steady waves as she sleeps safely beside the puppy that would not leave her. Their story continues in a small house, with food, care, and the quiet security of knowing that someone will always open the door when they need to go out and always be there when they come back in. When you look closely, this rescue is not really about a dramatic night in the woods. It is about what happens when small acts line up just right. A little dog refuses to abandon hope. A tired officer lets instinct speak louder than convenience. A vet and a handful of staff choose to stay late, to work carefully, to believe that a life found under broken limbs is worth every minute of effort. None of them saved the world. Yet together, they completely changed the world for two animals who had no other chance. Maybe you have seen moments like that in your own life, even if they did not look this dramatic. A stranger holding a door when your hands were full. A neighbor checking in when they noticed your porch light stayed off too many nights in a row. A quiet message from someone who felt that you were not all right and refused to look away. Tiny voices in small situations, all of them reminding us that waiting for somebody else to step up is how stories often end badly. This one ended differently because one tiny messenger simply would not stop asking for help, and one person finally listened. So before you let this rescue become just another tale you heard online, take a second to imagine how easily it could have disappeared into the dark. Picture that same road with no patrol car slowing down, that same forest with no flashlight beam cutting through the mist, that same trapped mother with no gentle hands to lift the weight pressing her to the ground. The distance between tragedy and hope in this case was no wider than the straight line between a determined puppy and a single open heart. If that thought moves you even a little, let it sink in. Let it remind you that your own choices, as small as they sometimes seem, can reach further than you think. You never truly know when a quiet yes to someone's unspoken plea will become the turning point of a story they tell for the rest of their life. If you felt your chest tighten when the branch refused to move, if you held your breath when Lucas nearly slipped on the path, if you smiled when the monitors in the clinic finally steadied and that tail began to wag again, then you are already part of this rescue in a way. You carried the tension, felt the fear, and shared the relief. That connection matters. And now, if your heart believes that loyalty and love can really change lives, let this be more than just a moment you forget tomorrow. Like this video, hit that subscribe button and comment below where in the world you are watching from so we know how far this little family's story has traveled. Share it with someone who needs proof that even on the quietest nights, courage can wake up and walk into the dark. And if you ever find yourself thinking that your voice is too quiet, your reach too small, or your efforts too insignificant to matter, remember that none of the beings in this story had any guarantee of success. The puppy did not know whether the patrol car would stop. Lucas did not know if he would arrive at the vet in time. The staff did not know whether treatment would work. They acted anyway. That anyway is where ordinary days turn into turning points. That is where the most meaningful rescues begin. Maybe your version of stepping off the safe road will look different. You might listen a little longer when someone insists they are fine, but cannot quite meet your eyes. You might volunteer a bit of time, open your home, offer food, send a message, or simply refuse to ignore the sense that something is wrong. These gestures rarely trend, rarely draw crowds, but they stack up quietly, just like paw prints on a path through the dark, guiding someone who has almost given up back toward the light. Every rescue you witness, share, or remember becomes a small lighthouse, shining quietly for the next soul lost in the dark. Because somewhere out there, another tiny voice is already gathering its strength, and another small set of paws is ready to chase down the next hero who might listen. Stay tuned, because the next real-life animal rescue we bring you will not only warm your heart, it will leave you absolutely speechless.